And welcome to another Perspectives. And this one just suddenly occurred to me actually this morning. I did have something in my mind that I was thinking of speaking of. And then this morning I was looking for a quote from a book. And I remembered that I had written on this in an earlier book of mine called New Revelations for a Small Planet. So I went back to this book to find the quote. And then I started looking through the book and I thought, wow, there's a lot here. So I'd like to speak about some extracts from this book. And I don't usually kind of speak directly about my work, but this kind of jumped up at me this morning. And in fact, this book, I have to say, really died a death. It didn't do anything. In fact, it's probably one of the books that just disappeared from my range. It's because I wrote this book, I think around late 2010 and 2011, and it was published in 2012 by Watkins Books. But just as it was about to be published, Watkins went into receivership. It changed owners, and a new owner came in, an American publisher, which has since left, but American publisher came in, and this book just fell through the cracks. So when a new owner came in, this book was just about to be released, and so they let it drift. So it had no marketing, etc. And a guy who's now my friend, my American buddy John, if you're watching, John, hi. He came in as on the editorial team at Watkins from the American publisher, and he saw this book and he read it, and he found out that no one in the office had even read the book. They had no idea about it. And he contacted me and said, I love this book, and we started chatting and we became friends. But the book actually just died a death. But actually it was one that I'd worked on quite a lot, quite heavily. And at the time it was the accumulation of all my thoughts. And I say, I'm not promoting the book. You can probably find secondhand copies for a few pence. In fact, I'll leave my email address below, and anyone who makes contact with me, I'll send you my personal PDF of the book, so you can read it. As you know, I'm not here for the money. I'm here for the transmission of the ideas. And so I want to get straight away on the book. So the certain part I want to get to, but I'll just read the opening page on the introduction. The opening page says, humanity is in the midst of a great transformation across the globe. This is now apparent to even casual observers of some of the changes happening on the planet at this time. Most of what we see in the daily news reports informs us of dramatic earth changes due to climatic disruption, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, etc. We are also witnessing a surge in people protest as decades of corrupt or inefficient social systems are taking their toll. Yet within this outward surge of turmoil and disruption, other shifts are occurring, such as the transition from the modern mind of the industrial globalization model of the last 2 centuries into a life-sustaining ecological cosmological worldview. We are seeing a change towards fostering values that will be inherited by the world to come. During the current and upcoming years, humanity, on both an individual and collective level, will have an obligation to readapt itself to a world in revolution. The revolution we are currently undergoing is not only of the physical kind, with struggle, strife and exertion. There are also revolutions now in our perceptions and worldviews, revolution in our collective psyche. Yet it doesn't stop there, as a revolution not only suggests a change or substitution in social cultural systems, a change in conditions, but also implies a complete orbit or rotation as well. I suggest in this book that life on planet Earth is undergoing all three types of revolutions: physical, psychic, and cosmological. That's why I called the book New Revolution for a Small Planet, because I also looked at the cycles of cosmic time and revolutions. But what drew me to it is that in one particular chapter, quite a large chapter in fact, I looked at the idea of global humanity going through a near-death experience, a dark night of the soul, a rites of passage, an initiation. And it's that which I was drawn to this morning, and by looking at it I thought, I'd like to return to that. Because in my last perspectives I talked about the need to discern between being in the profane area of life and associating with the sacred area of life, and how these two are becoming much more distant, apparent, and apart. So, in this rites of passage, I'm talking about a physical rites of passage, but also looking at it from a psychic, psychological consciousness perspective. And there's a few quotes in here. This one says that the civilization of our time, with its unlimited means for extending its influence, has wrenched mankind from the normal conditions in which he should be living. It is true that civilization has opened up for man new paths in the domain of knowledge, science, and economic life, and thereby enlarged his world perception. But instead of raising him to a higher all-round level of development, civilization has developed only certain sides of his nature to the detriment of other faculties, some of which it has destroyed altogether. Modern man's world perception and his own mode of living are not the conscious expression of his being taken as a complete whole. Quite on the contrary, they are only the unconscious manifestation of one or another part of him. From this point of view, our psychic life, both as regards our world perception and our expression of it, fails to present an unique and indivisible whole. That's a quote from Gurdjieff. So it suggests that this material side of life has advanced so far that humankind has become disharmonious with our context, our environment, and is becoming on a path of disaster. And we're no longer expressing ourselves from the being part of ourselves. And we have developed only certain sides of our nature to the detriment of other sides. And I would say we've developed the kind of rationalistic, external, profane side, which has created our sciences to the detriment of inner growth, leaving us kind of interiorly immature. And I say myself, nothing short of a global revelatory experience is required, an experience that would be able to awaken a collective human consciousness towards the grand evolutionary journey ahead. We have moved into our crisis window, a period for intense change, whereby we are called upon to make the leap from the octave of the old mind, characterized by the pathology of power, to the beginning sequence of an integral new mind, etc., etc. So I think this ties into what I mentioned before about, the profane and the sacred, and we've been spending too long in the profane. It was necessary to develop our individualized understanding, our sciences, our rational mind, and then we should leave it behind and develop the other side. But we've been stuck in this, I think, rationalized mindset, which is now to our detriment. And there's a mythologist here called Richard Heinberg. He wrote an interesting book. In fact, I should mention more about these books I've gone through in my past readings, but Richard Heinberg wrote Memories and Visions of Paradise, Exploring the Universal Myth of a Lost Golden Age, published in 1990. Here's a quote from Heinberg. He says, "As human consciousness lost contact with its internal heavenly source of power, technology emerged as a power substitute. Its first appearance was as sympathetic magic and as the invocation of spiritual beings to change nature for human benefit. However, as human awareness became increasingly restricted to the material world, purely mechanical technologies appeared." So, at one point, technology was a kind of means of magic, sympathetic magic, to invoke the forces of nature around us, or the forces of elemental beings, the forces of our consciousness being projected. But as our awareness became restricted more to the material realm, our projection onto technologies became purely mechanical. Hence now AI is now the projection of our savior technology. So I think that's interesting. And also another interesting researcher, Michael Grosso, which is not very well known these days. Michael Grosso, in his book, The Final Choice. And Michael Grosso echoes similar to what I mentioned in the Sacred Profane video about moving from the sensate world. He says, "Ours is a disintegrating sensate culture on the threshold of becoming a new ideational culture, a culture of higher consciousness. We are, we could say, in the midst of the near-death experience of our sensate culture." Interestingly, when I spoke last time on the Profane and Sacred, I had no idea about this book. I'd completely forgotten as well what I've written in this book. So I think it's interesting. I think it's appropriate to see this, what we're going through, as a rites of passage, because when you have the idea of a rites of passage, you have the idea of initiation, turbulence, discomfort as you go through this passage. But a passage denotes that it goes to the end of a passage, an onward journey, which means that what we're going through is a moment that this will pass. But we have to go through our own kind of initiation as a human species. So we're not in end times. We're in the apocalyptic time, which means revelation. We are revealing ourselves to ourselves. So I think if we consider this as a passage, we know that there's a other side of it. But it's at the beginning of the passage, it seems like we're from leaving the old world behind. It's like the death of the old, of course. Interestingly, I mentioned a play, an older play by Luigi Pirandello called The Man with a Flower in His Mouth. And I say, a man emerges from the doctor's office with a fatal diagnosis. With this knowledge of impending death, the man's world suddenly changes, and every small thing has significance. He undergoes a conversion of consciousness, a bleak diagnosis and shock, followed by a courageous renewal. Similarly, humanity may be caught up in a forced fatal diagnosis for change as our global civilizations begin to enter their near-death throes. Perhaps ours is a world with a flower in its mouth. So, maybe we need this diagnosis of shock to what we're going through to give us the courage for a renewal. Just a thought there. So I talk about, in fact, I think I'm going to make some of this work into some essays to put out, because there's a lot of stuff here which I think is relevant. And in fact, there were some investigators of near-death experiences, psychologists like Kenneth Ring, who did a very interesting book called the Omega Project, looking at near-death experiences. And he found that many of them, people who with a near-death experience, came back with completely, like an evolutionary shift, a completely altered awareness of humanity's trajectory. I quote from him here. He says, "All groups tend to agree that these experiences reflect a purposive intelligence and that they are part of an accelerating evolutionary current that is propelling the human race toward higher consciousness and heightened spirituality." And interestingly, another near-death experience researcher, Margot Gray, in her book Return from Death, had a similar conclusion. Quoting her, she says, "It would seem that similar physiological mechanisms are operating in both the NDE, near-death experience, and Kundalini phenomena, and that they are both aspects of the same evolutionary force. Taken together, these spectacular instances of transformation add up to a surprisingly large and increasing percentage of the population and might therefore be expected to have a growing influence on the collective awareness of the rest of the species at both a conscious and subconscious level. It would appear that a new breed of humankind may be about to be born, and that in order for this to happen, our consciousness and biological structure is undergoing a radical transformation. What we seem to be observing is a rebirth process, which will eventually culminate in bringing forth an enlightened human being who has knowledge of the life and order of the universe." So again, this is it seems that a lot of these experiences that have been building up in human society, especially over the last century, paranormal experience, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, even UFO abductions in certain realms, let's say, let's not go there right now. A lot of these experiences actually are happening in order to prepare, into human collective consciousness, the ideas of there's something else out there, something beyond this physical human life, beyond our restricted reality, and preparing it for this evolutionary shift. But in order to get there, we may have to go through a collective dark night of the soul, a collective initiation. So I think that's revealing in that we can see these that all these experiences are actually part of birthing throes, and just like we go through the birth canal in a biological human being, a biological woman, we have that kind of, the birth canal is squeezes, it's very tight, and there's the pressure to get through there. And I think the rites of passage is a kind of analogy to that, is that we have to, squeeze through this bottleneck in order to come out. At the end of the book, talking about the physical external revolutions, I actually wrote, remember I wrote this in 2010, 2011, and I say, quote, "It is my understanding that our current transition will emerge through a mix of the following critical thresholds. 1. Violent political upheavals due to deteriorating living standards, soaring food prices, and corrupt regimes. 2. Ad hoc, decentralized, and networked terrorist groups acting in guerrilla fashion. 3. Rapidly changing weather patterns affecting economies, food supplies, and populations. 4. Growing organized anti-Western, anti-capitalist, and anti-globalization movements. 5. Shifting geopolitical players and relations, such as those between China, India, Russia, and Brazil. 6. Collapse of the US position as the leading empire. And 7. Collapse of world financial markets and economies." Those I put down as the critical thresholds in order to get through this bottleneck. And finally, I finish off with a kind of parable. It's not mine, I took it from another source. I kind of paraphrased it. And it's called the allegory of the many-coloured room. So to finish off, I'll read that. There is a large room known only as the many-coloured room. And in this room, all the colours of the rainbow present themselves one at a time, changing colour every few thousand years. The many-coloured room has always existed and will continue to exist as long as there is a need for it. For thousands of years, the room is yellow. Then it turns to blue, then to red, then to purples, then to greens. Slowly, the room goes through all the colours of the rainbow. Within this large, many-coloured room reside a group of smart, intelligent beings, all of whom were born during a time when the colour in the room was red. Their parents were also born during the red cycle, and even their grandparents. In fact, as far back as their recorded history goes, the room has always been red. It is the only room colour they've ever known. You could say then that they have a red consciousness, and they expect red. Everywhere they go, they work with red. They are quite simply the red people. Over time, the many-coloured room starts to do what it has always done, and slowly begins to move into its next colour, the colour purple. What happens to those beings who have always known red? The first thing they experience is fear. The red beings say, "Here comes something odd and unusual, and it has never happened before. It's dark and scary. We must have done it. We must be responsible. There is no other explanation. Therefore, we must find ways to stop the purple. It's supposed to be red, not purple. Purple is wrong." But even amongst the red beings, there are those who know, understand and say, "But no, it's time to welcome the purple. We don't know why it is here, but we recognize that it is appropriate. Although we've always been red and we don't understand the purple, we're not afraid of it. Even some of our ancient wise elders spoke of a time when a shift in the red color would come. Maybe that time of the shift is now. Let us work with the purple." That's why, of course, it's called the New Revolution, because it's about the cyclic change on many different levels: individual, cultural, psychical, consciousness, and cosmical. So I think we put all these aspects together, it gives us more frameworks to see what we're going through right now. And it's been talked about for a while. I mean, I talked about this 10 years ago or 12 years ago, but there have been other traditions and other speakers writing about this for decades, even centuries. So it's been kind of dripped into the human consciousness, I think, to prepare us. The question is to be aware of it. If no one makes it available, then we don't have this other picture. You know, we're just looking at the same picture all the time. Of course, if you go to any picture behind me, or a picture on your wall, a picture in the museum, if you look up close, all you see is the individual pixels of the picture, and you can't see the grand design. It's only by stepping back you see more. So I think that all these transmissions of this information through indigenous wisdom, or through prophecies, or even channelings, or through the work of popular culture, through the work of writers and artists and anyone else, it's been trying to, transmit this idea that we are going to go through change. The color of the room will change to a different color. It's only that there are certain invested interests that are trying to hold on and manipulate that, and to manipulate by controlling the color agenda, that they are bringing in darker elements of fear. But if we understand this is a natural change, then the more we allow it, the more we bend into the wind of change rather than resisting the wind of change, the smoother we are going to be able to move through it. And as I look back at my corpus of work and the 20 or so books I've written in the last 12 or so years, it seems I've been trying to put that out there. And I say that not because I'm trying to be egotistical. I try not to speak about my work, trying to put it apart from personality. But I think we should take note that there's a lot of tools out there for us, a lot of different paths, a lot of different traditions, and there's no one way to navigate ourselves. There are many, as the well-known phrase says, there's many paths up the mountain, but the view at the top is the same. We should be allowed, with a civilized mindset, to start to find those tools that are most appropriate for ourselves. And rather than to cling on to the fear, to realize that we're just walking through a passage of change. And the greatest tool, of course, is the one that we carry within inside of us. Well, there's a few thoughts there. I say, came to me quickly this morning, so I thought I'd get it out before it passes my radar. Thank you for listening thus far, and as we go through this passage, stay well, stay sane, and stay grounded. And until next time.